welcome to Chapter 18, Protestant Reformation Part 2, okay, where we kind of look at what does the Protestant Reformation influence, okay? So we know that the Protestant Reformation in Part 1, right, was a protest against the Catholic Church, and we talked about how there were two major motives or reasons why people protested against the Catholic Church. Some because of secular rules. We saw a lot of monarchs like Henry VIII or German princes and stuff rebelling against the Catholic Church purely just over power, not necessarily about religious beliefs, but over power. And then the second reason people did it, people like Martin Luther and John Calvin, a lot of these people, because of religious beliefs, because of the corruptions within the church, and them taking liberties from the Bible that weren't in the Bible, and basically calling them out on that and saying, no, you're responsible for this. This isn't what the Bible says, and you're not right. And then from there, we see the formation of so many different sects of Christianity, right? Then we saw the Catholic Counter-Reformation, right? That they were going to bring reforms not only within the Catholic Church, but hold people accountable who spoke against them. They were not going down without a fight. And so we really see Europe divided, right? Italy, France, Spain remaining very Catholic, Germany on the northern part of Europe, and England becoming Protestant, and then breaking off into many different sects of Christianity. And in all of this, we see then a lot of people persecuted, not only by Catholics and by Protestants, but Jews and the witch hunts. And throw in there also during this time, we saw the tail end of the Black Death, and it's a very tumultuous time. But the influence that comes from this is the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, okay? And here's what I mean by that. If the Bible is not the only source of truth, meaning that if the Bible or religion can't answer everything, then where else do you seek answers? And what people started to realize is that they didn't have to go to the Pope for everything, that they themselves could read the Bible, right? Well, if they themselves can seek the answers in the Bible, what other answers that can't be found within the Bible can they go seek? And so it turns people, or a new curiosity, or really propels people to seek truth in other places, that maybe religion doesn't have all the answers. It has some answers, but not all the answers. And so people then start to seek truth in other places, all right? And science will become one of them. So we see a scientific revolution really start in the 1600s as a reaction, or kind of on the tails of the Protestant Reformation, that realizing religion doesn't have all the answers. And if it doesn't have all the answers, where else can we seek answers? Science then becomes an answer for that. And then in reaction to that, the Enlightenment becomes yet another movement off of that. If religion doesn't hold all the answers and science doesn't hold all the answers, maybe we as humans have some answers. Look at what we've done. Look at how we expose the errors of the church, and look at in science all the truths that we came up with through education and trial and error and scientific method. Maybe we ourselves hold some answers. So the Enlightenment is an intellectual movement, not a scientific movement, an intellectual movement that seeks to monitor social behavior in institutions and assign truths to them. Do humans, just for being humans, have certain rights? Do they have value? And people will have different views on this. For instance, John Locke will believe in what's called natural rights, okay? That all people, citizens, are born with value. And just being born with value, you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. That all humans being born have the right to life, to live, liberty, freedom, and to pursue property. You have to understand, John Locke was from England, and so he was an English enlightened thinker, and that only the elite, the upper class, could own property. If you were a peasant or lower class, just because of your social status, you were eliminated from owning property. And he's like, this is a violation of just human right. Just because you're born into an elite class doesn't mean that you should alone be allowed to own property. And John Locke really believed that monarchs, were incapable of understanding civil society, okay? And so he wrote that, monarchs were not the end all be all, and that people had a right to have a say, and that when monarchs overstepped, that citizens had a right and a duty to rebel. When their natural rights were being violated. You had others like Voltaire, an early enlightened thinker who was a French enlightened thinker who declared that no opinion is worth burning your neighbor for. So this was kind of speaking out against the Inquisitions and the witch hunts, you know, and the persecution of Jews. Just because you don't agree with someone doesn't mean you should be burning them at the stake. You shouldn't be putting them to death for a difference of opinion or religious views. So the Enlightenment encompassed a lot of different things: political views, religious views, difference of opinions, that is going to be a real movement. And these were perpetuated by the Protestant Reformation. It kind of allowed people that if religion isn't the only source of truth, people seek truth in other ways. The scientific revolution, and then also outside, just in their own discussions of what value humans have. So let's talk a little bit about the scientific revolution. So early on, the classic view of the universe, okay, was the geocentric theory, right? That the Earth was the center of the universe and the sun and all the planets revolved around this. Now, the Catholic Church loved this because if the Earth is the center of the universe and the Catholic Church is the most important entity on Earth and the Pope speaks for God, do you see how this reinforces the power of the Catholic Church? Okay, so they love this, all right? Well, going forward, this was disproven during the scientific revolution. Nicholas Copernicus, okay, rejected the geocentric theory and accepted the heliocentric theory, right, which we know today and widely accept today, that the sun is the center of the universe, right, and that all the planets revolve around that. Well, he actually died. He worked in secrecy. He died actually with this technology. With this discovery, and it was his fellow colleagues who discovered his discovery in his booklet. So when he died, they were going through his belongings and his work, and they saw his work and they were like, what is this? And they're reading through his theories and his ideas and what he's proven. And they're like, why didn't he present this? Well, it was because of the Inquisitions, the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformations. If he had gone public with this, he would have been arrested for heresy, speaking out against the Catholic Church, who supported the geocentric theory, and he could have been put on trial and imprisoned and possibly burned at the stake. So people weren't just being arrested for speaking out against Catholicism, for speaking out against anything that was might question the authority of the Catholic Church, even scientific theories. Kepler is going to go on and actually uses mathematics to validate the heliocentric theory, and he's going to show through mathematics the order of the planets and show the speeds, and will in fact develop Kepler's laws. Galileo is going to come along later in the late early 1600s, and it's going to develop the law of motion. The idea that light objects fall at the same speed as heavy objects. He's also going to develop the first telescope, okay? So think about how amazing this is for our ability to look into the universe and look at the stars and other planets and understand our solar system better. And this was a huge deal. Galileo was actually put on trial for the heliocentric theory. So when the heliocentric theory went public, Galileo was arrested for this and put on trial, and for going against the doctrines of the church, which promoted the geocentric theory, and basically was forced to recant through intimidation, through house arrest, and they basically threatened him that he could be burned at the stake. So after recanting, he was released, and it wasn't until 1992, you guys, 1992, that the Catholic Church came out and said that they were wrong, that the heliocentric theory is right. 1992, 28 years ago. Isn't that crazy? Some other scientific thinkers, okay? You have the English philosopher who developed the scientific method. You probably have all used this before, right? The whole idea of, in order for something to be scientifically true, there's a lot of different versions of truth, right? There's religious truth, which we base on faith, maybe something I can't physically prove, but I believe to be true. Scientific truth, there's a certain method you must go through it. So it's Sir Francis Bacon who will develop the scientific method. So the method of how do we prove something is true. And so It's a 7-step process, right? And we've all done this in a science class where you state the problem, right? You gather the information, you form the hypothesis, you perform the experiment to test the hypothesis, you record and analyze the data, you state your conclusion, and then you repeat the process several times to see if you're accurate. And if you get an accurate, and after repeating the process several times, then you compare it to your hypothesis, and then you can come up with a conclusion, right? Was your hypothesis accurate or not, to come up then with the scientific truth. Men like Sir Isaac Newton, okay, developing an explanation for, physics, okay, going along with Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo. And he is the one who's going to help prove gravity, all right? The famous story of the apple falling from the tree. So the idea of the movement of the planets, but the idea of the laws of gravity. And his book, Principia, published at his own expense, is going to be really big, explaining the universe and how it operates and gravity. Now, he gives credit to God. And here's the thing. A lot of the scientists of the scientific revolution were believers. They were religious men, but they saw science as a way of explaining our universe, where the Catholic Church saw anything that was outside of just God did it, any kind of explanation or scientific explanation, as contradictory or heresy. But the reality was that a lot of these scientific men were religious men. They weren't atheists. His mathematical achievements, he is going to develop calculus. So any of you who love calculus or are in mathematics, Sir Isaac Newton, you have him to thank for that. We see developments in red cell. Okay, Robert Hooke, through looking at a microscope, is going to develop, or is going to discover, the first cells and the first red blood cells. Despite all these new medical advancements, most doctors still practice the old way. They were so restricted by the Catholic Church. You have to understand, and we talked about this during the Renaissance, doing autopsies of bodies was forbidden. It was considered sacrilegious. So the knowledge of the body was so limited. They really were just very out of method. So most sick people couldn't afford an actual trained physician, and they went to midwives and things like that. And even then, medical professionals were not well trained because they were so limited by the Catholic Church and the limitations they put on science. You really had to, in secret, get bodies and do dissections, or do, look at bodies and stuff like that. But it was considered sacrilegious to do this. And so many people were limited in what they were allowed to do. So it was really hard to make advancements at the time, because you literally risked death. You literally risked being imprisoned for research, and especially on the human body. Have you ever wondered why outside a barber shop they have those stripes? Okay, it actually is because your typical barber at the time, okay, you didn't just go to them for a haircut, you would also go to them for minor surgeries. You wouldn't go to a local hospital. They weren't done at a local hospital, your local barber. So if you had like a boil or a wart, or you needed a tooth extracted, you didn't go to your dentist or something like that, your local barber would do this. And so this bandage represented the blood, the bandage, and the veins. Okay, so it's really funny today that the sign for a barber is actually a sign back then that they would do minor surgeries. So you would go to them for a haircut, but you could also go to them and they would remove a rotten tooth or a wart, or they would do bloodletting, where they would cut you and let out blood. It's because they believed that would help relieve you of the illness, when we know in a lot of cases that bloodletting would just kill people. Bloodletting was the practice of cutting the vein and literally letting the blood run out of the body, and believing that it was letting out the toxins of the body, and really all that was doing was taking someone who was already weak, right, and draining them of blood, which oftentimes would kill them. But you could go to these doctors at the barber shop, okay, medical professionals who would do this. Very outdated practice, but many people believed that it was helpful. But because they were so limited in medical research at the time because of the Catholic Church and their restrictions and hold and the threat they had of imprisonment, people had no other options. Society and their environment during the Protestant Reformation. The struggle for food was real. There was war, natural disasters, there was famine, there was many ice ages, there was a lack of food. Deforestation made not only building hard, but just basic fuel for keeping your family warm really, really hard. So when we talked about the witch hunts were not only because of the Black Death, but they were also caused by a lack of resources, people struggling for food. What was causing the ice ages? What was causing the lack of agriculture? What was causing the lack of forest? People would use the Jews and witches as a scapegoat or an answer for their problems, their economic problems. And the disparity between the rich and the poor was really, really huge. The bourgeoisie, which are the rich, kept getting richer off the backs of the poor. And this is going to lead to revolutions. Really, when we get to the 1700s in Europe, we're going to see a lot of revolutions because of the disparity between the rich and the poor. As the rich get richer at the expense of the poor get desperate. They get desperate and they want answers. And when they would turn to the church had no answers. And so they wanted someone to blame. So you look for minorities. So Jews were often an easy scapegoat because they were a small minority group who tended to be successful. And so it's easy to hate on someone who has more than us, who was more educated, who maybe had more successful businesses. Remember, the Jews could charge interest on their loans. Christians couldn't. And so a lot of Christians often owed Jews money, had loans out to Jews. So there was also that secret motivation, as we see in some of the primary resources we've looked at, that, reasons to get rid of Jews or to get rid of people because you could profit from it. Oh, if the Jews die, then there goes my loan. So we say it's, because we believe that maybe, they bewitched us or they brought on this famine. But really it's, if they go away, there goes my loan or there goes my debt that I no longer have to pay. And people were desperate. So the Protestant Reformation wasn't just about religious change. It was about protesting and rebellion, people seeking change. And unfortunately, there was a lot of persecution toward one another, toward minority groups, toward women. So minority groups meaning, Jews, minority groups meaning women. They were the targets. People who were helpless, unfortunately, took a huge beating during this time and were victims during this time.